Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. My biography is in your handout if you choose to read it. Suffice to say, I retired in December 2010 after more than 40 years in the uniform of the United States Army. And the highlight of those 40 years was probably my last 5, where I was assigned as the U.S. Security Coordinator for Israel and Palestine in Jerusalem. And the highlight of that was my relationship with the Canadian Armed Forces that were working with me and for me in that assignment. And Peter, you on behalf of the Army, I just got to tell you, they were fantastic. And I developed an appreciation for this country of Canada, which is an American I always had, but I developed it to a level that is simply stratospheric. I think Canada is a wonderful place. And when I was given the opportunity to make a keynote address, although I would tell you I am probably very unqualified for that, I jumped at the opportunity because I wanted to talk to Canadians again about an issue that is mutually very important, and I wanted the opportunity to see some old friends. So bear with me. You can see my topic. If I get this right, there's no need for any of us to be here the rest of the day. But let me tell you something. This is one whale of a topic, and it's one, of course, which nobody can appropriately answer. I need to start off with a disclaimer. Although I am a retired American military officer, I am currently the director of the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies in Garmisch, Germany. And as a result, I remain an employee of the United States government. So whatever I say here today is my personal opinion. I am not reflecting the opinion of the United States government. In fact, I'm probably not reflecting the opinion of many Americans. But my goal is to be a little bit provocative, to give us something to think about and kind of set the table for what I hope will be, as Steve pointed out, an extremely important conference, because these are issues that simply will not go away. And it's the issue, frankly, that we'll all be dealing with for the next decade, I'm sure. Let me go to try to see if this works. This is kind of what Steve said, except I thought it was a little bit cuter. Casey Stengel, some of you are too young to know who Casey Stengel was, but he was an American baseball manager, and as he said, never make predictions, especially about the future. I'm going to try to make a few predictions today, and I'm well aware, and I do it with humility, that this is a fool's errand. Secondly, Yogi Berra, who also played for Casey Stengel, and he's still alive, Yogi Berra is, we'd better have a pretty good idea of where we're going, because if we don't, we will not get there. And then the one that's most pertinent for all of us today is this quote, ascribed to Winston Churchill, but everything's ascribed to Winston Churchill, so who knows if he actually said it. But gentlemen, we are out of money, and now we must think. That's us. I try to put some kind of a lipstick on this particular pig of a presentation I'm doing here by giving you a thesis of what I'm trying to say. And you can read that. I'll highlight just a few things of it. Uncertainty. We really don't know where things are going, and for the first time in a long time, we're acknowledging that fact, and that is really important. Secondly, counterinsurgency operations, which 5 years ago were the rage, are now discredited. And I believe, and I will try to make the case, especially in my country, and my country matters, we're looking for an alternative, and we don't know what it is. And that's why conferences like this, I think, are useful. Threats are still going to hang around, whatever they are, and I'm going to talk a little bit about threats later. But austerity, however defined, is going to be very bad for threat-based strategies because you simply can't afford to do it all. No longer. And publics won't stand for it. And finally, and I'll come back to this at the very end, the idea of agility, alliances, and sound national economies will have to be the cornerstone of future international security for the liberal democracies. Now, why do I say liberal democracies? Because I can't speak for the Chinese or for the Russians or for any of these other groups out there. Our focus ought to be on what our liberal democracies, responsive to our publics, think we must do and what we think we can afford to do over the next decade. I think if we can get through the next decade, things might get better, but who knows? History, as Steve said, doesn't always point in that direction. Okay. I'm going to talk about these topics a little bit. I'm going to talk in a minute about what has changed as far as I see it, what's remained the same, the fact that conflict's going to be around, and deficits are here to stay, folks. And I'll talk about this in a minute. But this is not a transitory phase we are passing through with the light at the tunnel on the other side. Margaret Thatcher is famous for saying the problem with welfare states is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And I think she was probably right. And I think all of our governments are grappling with this right now. And I think this will actually be something that the United States presidential election will center around coming up in November. Having said that, if anybody thinks that the need for armed forces will go away, I think they are profoundly mistaken. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to lighten up this discussion a little bit by just showing you a few snapshots of what I feel the current security environment has embedded within it. I borrowed this from a good friend of mine, Admiral James Stavridis, the Supreme Allied Commander, and he, I think, is right on when he talks about these things. So a few snapshots on the current security environment. No, that's not somebody who went through 2 days of a conference here in Kingston. This typifies, quite frankly, the demographics that most of the liberal democracies are facing today. A rapidly aging population, a declining demographic of young people, and a belief that welfare of older people, especially because older people tend to vote, is one of the highest priorities of government. And it's not going to go away. It's going to intensify over the next 10 years, and you, as military strategists and planners, had better get used to that idea. And wishing it away simply isn't going to work. This is a fundamental aspect of the security environment in the next decade. War in Afghanistan, drugs. Just so happens the two come together there. Both of them will influence what happens over the next decade. Yes, I know NATO is committing to remove combat troops from Afghanistan in 2014, and if anybody thinks that's really going to happen smoothly and efficiently, then they don't know history very well. It's going to be very ugly, it's going to be very difficult, and the drug problem is huge. People of my generation don't understand how big the drug problem is in all of our liberal democracies. It is everywhere. It is pervasive. And again, we ignore this aspect of the security environment at our peril. We're not in Afghanistan because of drugs, but we probably should be. Nevertheless, watch out what happens here, because that is part of the environment. Refugees from weak or failed states. This picture here is of a refugee camp in Tunisia during the chaos that occurred in Libya last year. Refugees are with us. They will increase because more and more states are probably going to fail. It's just the nature of the business of the middle decade here of the early 21st century. And what do you do with these people? They're on the headlines for a few minutes, a few hours, and then they disappear. But they're still there. And governments have to deal with them. That is an aspect of the security environment that also will not go away. I've always liked this picture. This guy is called the Cellist of Sarajevo. It's an old picture. It goes back about 10 years. This guy, during the siege of Sarajevo by the Serb armies, every time there was a lull in the fighting, he would show up in an old cathedral, which this was, and he would play his cello. That's kind of nice. It kind of makes you feel good. But the fact is, ethnic problems remain, and they are getting worse. Anybody who thinks Europe has graduated from the ethnic conflicts of the 1990s needs to go sit in Mitrovica in Kosovo. It has not ended, and it will not end, probably for a very long time, if ever. And Europe is the easiest. In Asia, you have tremendously bloody conflicts that go on beneath the radar, not to mention Africa, where the conflicts are very intense, not just in Sudan and not just in Congo, but in most African countries. You still have this problem. We don't deal with it anymore because we don't have the capability to deal with it. Probably because it's not in Europe. Canada has tried to deal with the Congo problem, but it's becoming very, very difficult and very expensive. Nevertheless, ethnic-based conflict is part of today's security landscape. Whoop, went too far. Uh-oh, there we go. Lest you think everything's just simply non-conventional stuff, take a look at what's going on in Iran. Okay? Iran, nukes and all. And Iran isn't simply a nuclear problem. Iran is a problem with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran is a problem in Syria. Iran is a problem in Palestine. You have a rising Middle Eastern power that is challenging the status quo in a very real and a very direct way, and frankly, the world doesn't know what to do about it. And, of course, the missile is indicative that it's not all just little guys running around in the bush that you have to worry about. It is a very powerful, relatively rich, modernizing country that we are all going to have to come to terms with, one way or the other. And let me tell you, folks, my humble opinion, we're not doing a very good job of it, okay? And what's going on in Syria indicates that we are absolutely flat-footed on this problem, and we simply don't know what to do. Terrorism. It's not just Al-Qaeda anymore. You know what this picture is. This is in Oslo. This is our friend Mr. Breivik, who was apparently a very right-wing, anti-immigrant radical. 50 years ago, he might have been called a Nazi. These ideas are still out there, and it's so easy in this world for anybody to get access to the stuff you need to do things like this, which, again, will capture the attention of governments and the world for a few days, and then fade away, and then happen again, and then fade away. The problem is that one day, it's quite possible that one of these events will be more than simply an interesting, oh my God, we're so sorry that happened event, into something that could be much more catastrophic. Had he decided to blow up a nuclear power plant, he probably could have done it. Had he decided to shoot a parliament, he possibly could have done it. But the point is, you've got terrorism out there, and it's not just radical Islam, but it's a whole bunch of other crazy people out there who, given the nature of today's society, are empowered, and they can do things that will be very dangerous to all of us. Very sad picture. Ukrainian young woman, somewhere in Western Europe. Illicit trafficking, organized crime. This woman, drug addict, okay? This is a security problem. It's one that the world probably should deal with, but doesn't have any idea how to do it. Oh, it's a policing problem. No, it's not. It's a baloney. It's a very serious problem. And in the part of Europe that I find myself living in now, the Germans are obsessed with the problem of illicit trafficking, human trafficking, drugs, and organized crime. Is this something militaries need to worry about? Well, not until the civilians find out they really can't handle it. And then guess what? The military is the force of last resort. This is a problem that not just exists, but is growing, and frankly, is growing rapidly, despite all of the good intentions of the world to stop it. Okay, come on. Well, you know about piracy, gangs, ungoverned areas. That's all, again, part of the 2012 security environment. And that one's not going away very much either. Although I know there are significant efforts being taken against the Somali pirates, there is piracy in other areas now. The Straits of Malacca is a major piracy area. You just wait. When somebody finds out that the northern passage through the Arctic is all of a sudden open and ready for business, you'll find pirates up there too. And Canada and the United States cannot avoid thinking about that, because wherever there's money to be made, in 2012, there are means, illegal, to go after it. And security forces will have to deal with that. Cyber. Geez. We love to think we're on top of this one, but we're not. Nobody really knows where this is going. Now, the picture of the Wright brothers aircraft here is only to say that about 10 to 15 years after that picture was taken, and remember, this was a pioneering flight, you had airplanes being used in combat. They were an instrument of warfare. 10 years from now, nobody knows where cyber warfare could go. It may go relatively rapidly due to the security leaks that have come out of the United States that indicate that the United States is already engaging in cyber warfare. Is that an act of war against Iran? Could be. I suspect the International Criminal Court would say it is, and which means then Iran and China and Russia and others are entitled to accelerate programs to go back at the rest of us that might have started it. Who knows? My point is, this is an area that is going to loom large. I doubt we'll talk much about it today because we just don't know about it. We don't know what to do. It's kind of like the weather. Everybody worries about it, but we can't fix it. Well, somebody's going to fix it. And NATO's taking some interesting steps out of Estonia where they have a college on this, but even they would admit that they don't know where this is going, but boy, it's really dangerous and very worrisome. Illegal migration. Yeah, mainly a European problem coming from Africa, but it doesn't take much of an imagination to figure out that it could come elsewhere. The United States has a problem on its southern border. Alleviated now because our economy is doing badly enough that some of these people are going back. But nevertheless, the idea that people have a right to move wherever they want to seek a better life is certainly one that is not challenged by many free-thinking liberals in the world. And this is a picture taken from Italy. These are people from North Africa and Central Africa. And the problem is that governments are not prepared to deal with this. And usually this will default back to some form of a security service having to deal with it. I love this one because I'm an old Russia hand. I used to be our defense attaché in Russia. And I always smile when people talk about how the Russians are part of, the Euro-Atlantic community and all this other kind of stuff. They may be, but my experience is don't hold your breath too long. Russia has long thought of itself as very different. And under the man in the rear here, Mr. Putin, they continue to think of themselves as very different, very skeptical of the West, and Russia believes that time is on its side. For the last 15 years, Russia has been trying to reform its military, trying to get out from under the legacy of the communist system which destroyed its military. Not doing a very good job of it yet, but if you get a Peter Devlin that comes in and takes charge of the army and can actually reform it and turn it into something very serious, we will face a whole new range of challenges in Europe and in Central Asia that we haven't had to worry about for 15 or 20 years. And as Russia gets richer, as oil gets more dear, I think you'll find that with more money, Russia can do many things. I'm not even going to talk about China or other countries. There are such things as natural disasters. They still happen. Man-made disasters, too. This is a picture taken from a recent Turkish earthquake. You can't avoid these things. They also become drains on a security service because the publics expect the military to help them out as the agency of last resort. And you just can't avoid that. And so as we think about where we're going and what kind of capabilities we've got to have, you can't ignore this one. Because at the end of the day, most publics couldn't care less what happens 5 countries over, but they care very much about what happens at home. This is a picture of Facebook and the connections on Facebook. You take a look at that. If you don't think we are an interconnected, globalized world where social media is everywhere, then you've got another thing coming unless you live out in Siberia somewhere or perhaps in China, which has established very strict controls. The point here is that, again, as we look at what we think we're doing in an age of austerity in international security, you can't ignore the fact that there are literally billions of other players out there who frankly don't care what happens in Washington or in Ottawa, but they do care about what happens in their own little area that they operate. And they will communicate with each other, and they will do it in a way, many have said the Arab Spring derived a lot of its immediacy from the what's so-called Facebook revolution. I think many pundits are relooking that now and saying, boy, we kind of missed that one. But nevertheless, the point is the world is increasingly interconnected. You can't ignore it, and it's here, and security planners have got to take that into account when they come up with recommendations for the politicians. And finally, that's a euro, by the way, being squeezed. We are in serious, serious financial trouble. don't be fooled. We've had 70 years of relative financial stability in the world markets. If Greece leaves the Eurozone, Spain might. It's funny how to watch. 2 days ago there was euphoria. Spain was going to get out of this mess. The Dow Jones went way down yesterday. People realized that this was a false dawn, folks, that the problems are deep and they're very, very serious. So anyway, all of what we're talking about is done in the backdrop of countries rapidly wondering if they're going to have money to deal with what they have to deal with in the future. So let me get back to boring slides here, because I have a few points here I really do want to make. What's changed over the last decade? And that's kind of my time horizon here. Well, it's pretty obvious. Dramatically reduced defense budgets. People will say there are no more existential threats. Maybe. Racing for the exits on stability operations, and I'll come back to that. But my country, despite all the disclaimers, is doing just that, in my view. Globalization is here, it's deeper, it's a net plus, no one would argue against that, but it does give opportunities for the bad guys that they couldn't have dreamed of 10 years ago, whether they're criminals, whether they're human traffickers, whether they're drug traffickers, whether they're terrorists. And you've got to keep that in mind as you start strategizing about what we do for the next decade. Because, folks, the old paradigms are not going to work. That's my personal view. And as I say here, a crisis in the Bretton Woods economic system. As you all know, this was the one that came up with the IMF, the World Bank, right at the end of the Second World War. And we have had 7 decades of unprecedented stability in global markets. Before World War II, you'd have a panic, a boom, a panic, a boom about every 10 or 15 years. 7 decades of quiet. And during those second decades, it gave rise to the modern welfare state, because people thought all that trouble was behind them. And they took on commitments to their publics which were unthinkable before the Second World War. And yet those commitments are there, and publics expect it. The problem is we have numerous countries in Europe that have a sovereign debt problem. Canada has avoided this largely, the United States not quite as well. The Eurozone is, and I live in the Eurozone, it's in real serious risk. The Germans worry about it every single day. And it's not just Greece. It's Spain, it's Portugal, it's Italy, it's still Ireland. There are a lot of countries on this common currency that, unfortunately, if one goes down, it drags down a dozen others. And that's something you got to keep in mind. The United States debt is owned largely by China. If you were a man on the moon looking at that situation, you would say, what in the world were those American policymakers thinking of, giving our debt over to a country which is at best a rival and at worst a potential enemy? And yet that's where we are. And it has profound security consequences. So much so that there are people in Europe anyway who write blogs and who are pundits who suggest that we may be approaching the end of the dollar standard and an end to financial stability. I don't want to be a hysterical historian, and actually I am a historian, but I do remember that in times of previous economic, really deep recessions or depressions, countries came out of this in many cases by appealing to nationalism, by appealing to parochialism, and it wasn't just chance after the major economic crisis that followed the First World War that you ended up with the fascists in Italy and Germany and in Japan. And what followed from that was something that had profound consequences for the security environment that we're all going to deal with. Well, if that wasn't good enough, we still have China, India, Brazil, some would say Iran, emerging as world powers. They're doing okay. They're not quite as tied to the global economy as others are. You've got Turkey. This is a new factor in Europe. Turkey is indeed emerging. And what I should have put as a footnote here is Turkey had been a stabilizing factor in the Middle East for many, many years. Turkey was always kind of a quasi-ally of Israel. No more. Turkey is very hostile to Israel. As I think you know, they just indicted 3 senior Israeli military officers for events that occurred in 2009 on a ship that was boarded by Israeli special forces off the Israeli coast. And so Turkey, as opposed to being a stabilizing factor for everyone, is now a bit more of a wild card. We all want Turkey to succeed. We all want Turkey to be a member of the European Union. And of course, it's a member of NATO, but there's something going on in Turkey that we don't really understand, and a good strategist will keep an eye on that. The Arab Spring, which Steve mentioned, well, I think you'll find it difficult to get a group of scholars to A, agree on what the Arab Spring was or is, and B, to say it was an unmitigated blessing. Okay? Tunisia, maybe. Maybe. Tunisia's got problems below the surface with its Islamist people that you wouldn't believe. But Egypt, my gosh, the emergence of elected political Islam with impacts that we can't even yet assess because we don't know what's exactly going to happen in the Egyptian presidential election. But nevertheless, something is going on in the Arab world, which, again, we poorly understand. We called it wrong early on. Even Libya, one of the ones that we often point to as an example of good proactive policy, you'll find many scholars who say Libya is currently in chaos, and it will get even deeper in chaos as tribes and clans continue to fight it out with weapons that were left over from the Gaddafi regime. And oh, by the way, if they aren't satisfied with tearing up Libya, then they'll go to Mali or Mauritania or other countries in the region and further destabilize the Sahel region of Africa. At the same time, a security planner's got to deal with the decline of the traditional military powers, especially in Europe. Germany, where I live, got rid of conscription, okay, but then found out it couldn't get enough people to join the military. Germany has cut its military by more than 50% in the last 3 years. Its officer corps is being decimated. And Germany says, well, look, we'll be a niche player. We'll find peacekeeping missions that we can contribute to, but don't call on Germany for anything serious. We simply are not interested, and our public won't support it. The United Kingdom, not in a free fall, but a very serious decline, and that's only because you have a Cameron government that is determined to hang on to something. If you had a Labour government, I think it might be a different story. And even France, where Mr. Francois Hollande has said he's leaving Afghanistan early, and oh, by the way, he's going to ramp up the welfare state even more, and gee, how's he going to pay for it? One of Sarkozy's problems was he couldn't pay for the stuff that he already had to, as obligations. So there we go. And then Russia and Europe. You all probably know that Germany has abandoned nuclear power because of the Fukushima disaster 2 years ago. So what does that do? It throws Germany into the lap of Russia, who has promised to give them gas and oil, and they'll take care of them. And German politicians are saying, gee, thank you very much. Let's build a new pipeline that will service Germany directly. We don't have to worry about any of these other countries. Russia, you're our savior. And Vladimir Putin is looking at that, I have to think, and just saying, this is too easy. I didn't think it would be this easy, but gee, this is great. And Europe overall is increasingly drawn into a Russian energy orbit, maybe not a political one, but it's amazing for me as an American to watch how German politicians run to Moscow when a problem comes and ask the Russians for help. Didn't happen like that 10 years ago. Has the United States overstretched? I don't know. There were predictions of this 20 years ago in a famous book, by a guy named Kennedy, who said it's coming. Well, I don't think we really have overstretched yet. And the United States does have a very, very strong underpinning to its economy and to its society. But nevertheless, there are a few cracks that make you kind of wonder. And then I've already talked about the new threats. These have changed, and they're all, frankly, intensifying. What hasn't changed? Well, the U.S. still there as the predominant global military power, but not quite with the strength that it was 10 years ago. Wars take it out of you, and they sort of took it out of us. The NATO alliance is still key. You can read the other pieces there. People still want to join it, okay? So NATO is still alive and well, although even in Chicago, NATO struggled with who are we and where are we going after Afghanistan. Afghanistan, in my humble opinion, gave all of these security establishments a few more years to figure it out, because Afghanistan wasn't going to last forever. And now it's getting close to the time when we better figure it out. And I have to tip my hat to the Canadians for sponsoring a conference that is, in my view, it's not a dull conference at all. It's not a boring topic. It is probably the topic that we should be talking about, without a doubt, today. Conflicts are still there, folks. Israel, Palestine, Georgia, Russia, the South Caucasus, Southeast Europe, India. I mean, come on, you can see what I've got there. That really hasn't changed. Now, one of the things I was asked to do, and I'll try not to bore you much longer, but the legacy of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, did they have any impact on what we're doing? And my thinking is an enormous impact, okay? What a difference a few years makes. In 2008, if I were standing in front of you, I would be talking all about stability operations, the long war, the fact that we're winning the hearts and minds, the fact that NATO has come on board with this whole idea of counterinsurgency. Dave Petraeus was leading the surge in Iraq and then later in Afghanistan. Large coalition forces united to win. I can't tell you that today. Today, the United States is frankly quite pessimistic about this. The government continues to say, oh, it's going okay, nobody believes that. Not really. And you get a lot of counter-reporting in the major media services of the United States that say, not only is it not working, it's really doing badly, and we should get out while we still can. Corruption, losses in both Afghanistan and Iraq. The losses are minimal compared to what we've lost in previous wars in terms of soldiers, but they're magnified by what? Well, by the fact that what are they dying for? Is this really working? Should we be doing this? And unfortunately, it comes at a time when you have an economic crisis, austerity kicks in, austerity says war's bad, counterinsurgency war is even worse. Let's not do this anymore. Let's instead rely on high tech. That's what we're good at. We'll rely on drones and standoff and things like this, as opposed to ground forces. I challenge you, and I'll probably say a few more words about this, if that isn't just simply trying to make a virtue of necessity and, as we like to say in America, whistling past the graveyard, okay? And I think the United States is changing course, and others will follow. Let's look at the U.S. for a minute. In my view, the main lesson learned from Afghanistan is don't do it again, okay? And it's the discrediting of counterinsurgency operations. And I'll come to that in a minute. Our national priorities are changing. I think they're changing back towards domestic priorities. We're tired of expeditionary wars. We don't want to do this anymore. It not only did it cost us a lot of money, it cost us precious lives, but also it isn't working, okay? It just simply isn't working. And so we have revised in January the priorities and missions of our armed forces. I'll come to that in a minute. The big winners are the Navy and Air Force. The losers are the Army and the Marines. And the reason for that is because navies and air forces are always out there deployed, and the Army and the Marines, it takes an awful lot to support them. And I think there are very serious long-term domestic implications for security, especially in the United States. And I don't want to exaggerate this, but as the United States goes, many members of the NATO alliance will look to see if they should follow, okay? And I think the 2012 election in the United States may eventually revolve around some of these issues. So what are our changed priorities? Well, this is, again, my view, but I think it's get our domestic house in order first. Reduce the budget and national debt, because national debt and an unbalanced budget are now increasingly perceived as a national security threat in themselves. Defense will pay the bill, largely. As you see there, you can reshape the armed forces, aim for a balanced budget, and then decide whether you're going to raise taxes or cut spending. You know, I spent a couple of days up in Ottawa before coming down here, and it's always wonderful to hear my Canadian colleagues and their impression of what's going on in the United States. And I tell you, many Canadians are deeply troubled by the intense partisanship that they see currently in the United States, and the fact that there isn't any real consensus emerging, but rather pulling farther and farther apart. That's happening for a very simple reason. and that is that many Americans truly believe that this election in 2012 will decide the future of the United States for the next 10 to 20 years. And it's a future whether it'll be either more taxation, stronger welfare state, or the opposite. And the United States is not Canada, and we think differently in that regard. And so bear with us, folks, as we go through this. It'll be very interesting for you to watch from up here in the north. Priority, responsibly end the war in Afghanistan. Notice I didn't say win it. I said end it. Okay? Get out of there. Of course, we want to do all this violent extremism, WMD, terror, all that. Pivot our national attention towards the Asia Pacific and Middle East. Boy, if there was ever a word that captured the imagination of the security community, pivot was it. Great basketball term. Many people don't even understand it. And within a week, it was being taken off the, we don't talk about pivot anymore. We love everybody, you know, we're not going to really do this and all this. You know, a lot of going backward on this. So just think about that. And then again, we want to meet the challenge of the Arab Spring, whatever that is, and honestly, we don't know, while defending Israel. And Israel remains one of the very few areas in which there is broad consensus in the United States that Israel needs to be protected and survive as it is today. And Africa and Latin America become economy of force areas along with Europe in how we look at things. Very briefly, these are the top 10 roles of the U.S. Armed Forces in our new security doctrine. You have to go all the way down to number 9 before you find something that looks like counterinsurgency operations. Number 9 out of 10. So a strategic planner looking at how we devise things in an age of austerity shouldn't put this at the top of the list as far as a capability, at least not in the United States. The problem is what most of these ones in front of it lead you towards is either some kind of a special forces capability or some kind of a cyber warfare capability still to be defined, and that's kind of where we are. You don't really find, deter and defeat aggression. Okay, well, you could say, well, that justifies large armed forces. The problem is the devil is truly in the details here. And, when you actually start trying to justify them, it becomes very hard. Whoops, I'm just a little bit ahead of myself. God, I got way ahead of myself. Forgive me, I know this is boring you, but I think it's important to go through this stuff. So, there is a legacy of these two wars. Don't make a mistake and say, oh no, we can just kind of pass it on and forget about it. For the United States, as you know, our longest war, we perceive it as a tremendous investment in lives and treasure. We don't think the strategic goals have been achieved or can be achieved, and the casualties and corruptions are in our newspapers and on our television sets every night. What does this lead us to do? Well, as I said, we focus inward. Increased focus on social welfare. And again, as I said, this is what the election will probably center on in the United States. And the Shakespeare quote here simply means that if you're going to go to war, you'd better find out a way to get in and out quickly, and don't let it drag on, because it's almost a theorem that the longer you fight, the less popular support you'll get at home. And that's just the way it is. There is a perception we're running out of money. Steve Bose talked about this. There's really a question of whether or not we should try to change societies, or if it's just simply too hard. Can't be done. Don't try. Let them be themselves. The only problem is when you let them be themselves, sometimes they bomb you, or they want to do things to you that you don't like. So the whole idea, that even 5 years ago, that democracy was on the march and all of this was going to be wonderful, seriously being questioned right now. And again, a strategic planner needs to be thinking about that. And again, I say most, I should probably say many allies are fading fast. Germany, United Kingdom, France. As I look around Europe, the only bright spot I can find is Sweden. And Sweden's not even a member of NATO. But Sweden's as frustrated with its neighbors as many members of NATO are. Okay. Threat, I got to say something about threat, but I'm going to argue with it that a threat-based model is no longer workable. The threat landscape, I already showed you a lot of what's out there right now, and I could give you a pretty serious intellectual question to ponder, which is, does threat really matter anymore at a time when we can't afford to meet it? And that's That's a flat statement, but I think you ought to be thinking about that. And of course, you do have potential threats. Russia, China, Iran. Large conventional forces. Everybody's kind of moving in the wrong direction on that if you want those. NATO ballistic missile defense, that's cool, but it also alleviates, it gives the United States the opportunity to remove 2 combat brigades from Europe in the next 18 months. Okay? They're going to come back to the United States. No one knows if they'll survive once they get back into the United States. We talk about smart defense and pooling and sharing. In other words, if my country can't afford to do it, maybe I can get country B to come up with a niche that I need in order to allow me to do what I need to do, or maybe B, C, D. The only problem is that when the crunch comes, politicians in B, C, or D may not want to cooperate, in which case I have a capability that I can't use because it's not complete. And again, I think it's possible that we are trying to make a virtue out of necessity. And when it comes to the threat, all those things I showed you with the little cute snapshots, that's the trees. Can we really stand back, and I hope that one of our panels can get into this, and see what the real threat is beyond all those trees, because those are just trees, folks. And a strategic planner can't focus on each one of those and tick them off and say, there, and I've got a strategic plan. But rather, we've got to see the threat forest for those trees. I have to say something about austerity, because austerity is the buzzword of this year. It will be probably for the next several years to come, and it's a real problem. But look at what I consider anyway to be the rationalizations, not rational arguments, but rationalizations that justify lowering the guard. Wars are no longer the solution, especially expeditionary ones, so stay at home. There aren't any existential threats. High tech can do the job more cheaply and more cleanly. Really? We're not having a tremendously good go at that with the drone warfare in Pakistan and Afghanistan, I just would remind you. Domestic needs are the most important. It's not guns, it's butter, and the future security environment is predictable, and we'll have warning time if we need to ramp up again. Boy, that's a historian's nightmare. And the real threats, well, they don't really have a military solution. The real threats are the economy. The real threats are organized crime and ethnicism and all this kind of stuff. So don't tell me you need a big armed force to do that. No, you don't really need that at all. We just need a big gendarmerie, and we'll be okay, because the world has fundamentally changed. Well, I hope we struggle with that a little bit today, because that's a very important decision for strategic planners to make. If they agree with these rationalizations, then you really don't need much left in the military. If they disagree, they've got a long road ahead to try to convince politicians. And that's kind of what my last thing says. We've been there, we've done that. The United States historically has done this after every major conflict. We will probably do it again, but we better get it right this time. I'm almost done, so don't give up. So what's to be done? Well, I would tell you that the Canadians have organized a conference to at least address this question. I would tell you that I think we ought to be looking at capabilities and not threats, because austerity is not going to let us look at threats. And having said that, we're in for a dark time, and people in this room are going to have to keep the flame burning during that dark time and not give away the farm to politicians who are rarely strategic thinkers and count on us to be so, even if they don't take our advice. Publics are tired, they're anxious, but curiously, they're complacent as well to follow a political lead. Still, we'll see where that goes. In Canada, one of the countries that taught me the value of whole of government was always onto something here. Canada said they did it because they were so small, they had to do it, they had to get synergy from everybody working. But you know what? We're all going to be in that boat pretty soon, and I think whole of government becomes more critical than ever. Well, I can't get up here and say I don't have any answers, because even though I don't, I have to give you something. So armed forces, I think, have got to be agile. Alliances are going to be the key, but allies have to come with some genuine capability. And pooling and sharing, as attractive as it sounds, is a concept that deserves very serious scrutiny by serious people, because otherwise it's simply a nice way to paper over a problem and kick it on to the next generation. Sound national economies? Yes, no doubt about it. It is indeed a national security issue for all of us. We are out of money, and so now we've got to think. And I think we're about to see a re-energizing of the old debate between hard and soft power. I, as a proponent and as a person who works in a soft power entity, I think soft power has some real benefits. And I'll use this slide here from, again, my friend Admiral Stavridis. I think it's a very good one. You've got to have the appropriate mix. This is a rheostat, a smart power rheostat. And on the far left is war and crisis, on the far right is peace and prosperity. And if you have an appropriate mix, and I don't know what that is because I'm not as smart as the rest of you out here, but if you have an appropriate mix, you just might have a chance of developing a strategy in a time of austerity. And cast your net wide. Everybody knows what this is, right? It's the Wikipedia emblem. One of the neat things about Wikipedia is everybody writes it. This isn't a group of scholars that wrote the Encyclopedia Britannica, but anybody can contribute to this thing. And especially in our countries at a time of austerity, I think we need to harness as much of the energy of people who are interested in this as we possibly can and leave no voice unheard. Okay, this shows I'm getting to the end. Don't ever forget, as I call it, austerity's sinister twin is the social welfare state. Eventually, it may come to a conflict between the two, security and social welfare. Which is more important? I would argue that Germany and France have decided social welfare is more important because that's where the votes are, okay? I don't think the United States or Canada or many of the other liberal democracies have gone that far yet. But the danger is if they see a model out there, they may want to follow it. Just keep that in mind. I've already talked about globalization. I've talked about the security burden sharing idea. It's not a catchphrase, folks. The United States will increasingly become embittered against what they see as free riders, countries that don't pull their weight, and yet they want all the benefits of being a member of a large alliance. And don't ever forget that America's involvement in the world, historically, really only came in World War II. Up until then, we had a glorious history of about 170 years of isolationism, America first. It's all about North America. I'm not saying that's coming back, but there will be some who suggest that get your house in order at home first and then go for something outside. Again, partner capacity building, soft power, all important, but never forget that China and Russia and maybe Iran are waiting in the wings. No strategist would be smart if he didn't end with something by Sun Tzu. Two simple quotes. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. But if you are ignorant of your enemy and yourself, you are certain to be in peril. Now that's a rather sobering view here, folks, and I hope I haven't discouraged anybody, but I hope I've challenged you to think about these things as we go along. I was in Ottawa, and I was stunned to see banners everywhere about the War of 1812. Okay, they're there. I mean, people I'd never heard of. Sir William Brock. I'm an American historian, never heard of Sir William. William, is that his name, Sir William? Isaac Brock. See, you know, I don't. But, you know, if you walked up to 100 Americans and asked them what was the Battle of Chateauguay, I think 99.9 would say, I don't know, and yet it's on your banners. So I appreciate that. And my final comment here is I'm going to try to end this on a lighter note. And I know my Canadians know this story, but a few of the Americans might not. And it's kind of in honor of the War of 1812 in a way. And it's a cautionary tale about false assumptions. None of us should go into these 2 days thinking we have all the answers, or that the conventional wisdom we've lived with for decades is the right answer, because we might be operating under an assumption that is not only false, but will embarrass us. So here, bear with me. If you've all heard it, you still have to laugh at the end. This is allegedly a transcript of an actual conversation between a U.S. naval ship and Canadian authorities off the coast of Newfoundland in 1995. Canadians, please divert your course 15 degrees south to avoid a collision. Remember, this is a radio conversation. The Americans, oh no, recommend you divert your course 15 degrees north to avoid a collision. Canadians, negative. You will have to divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. At this point, the Americans get a little bit irritated. Americans, this is the captain of a U.S. Navy ship. I say again, divert your course. Canadians, no. I say again, you divert your course. The Americans are really angry by now. Americans, this is the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, the second largest ship in the United States Atlantic Fleet. We are accompanied by 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you change your course 15 degrees north. I say again, that's 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this ship. Canadians, this is a lighthouse. It's your call. Thank you very much.